Let's bring back in Belpointe Chief Strategist David Nelson, Fox News contributor Mercedes Schlapp, former president of Young Democrats of America, Atima Omara, and editorial director for the Washington Examiner, Hugo. Gurdon, thank you for sitting with us and listening to that. Mercedes, what do you make of this obsession with the Russia narrative?
Well, I think this stems back, obviously, to the election, and it's something that the media has maintained a focus on. It's something that the Democrats have continued to push forward, although we have not seen evidence of collusion. And also, in the sense of on the Trump side, is the fact that, when you have a meeting come out where you had Donald Trump Jr. meeting with a Russian lawyer, while nothing came out of that meeting at all, that's where the media jumps in. It's the drip, drip, drip of what happened. And that's why I think it's so critical. And I think that this is something that General Kelly will emphasize, is if there were any meetings with the Russians during the campaign, let it out. But at the same time, there's that double standard where you do have the Democrats, in essence, with Fusion GPS, meeting with the Ukrainian government. And really, there's no emphasis or discussion on that end.
Yeah, Atima, let me go to you here. One of the reporters asked a question. She suggested there's a credibility issue that is hurting the Trump agenda, that people in his own party, the Republican Party, don't necessarily trust or believe what the president says he's going to do. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, last summer, you had Donald Trump Jr. laughing about the fact that the campaign was at all colluding with Russia. And then you have, evidence that resurfaces a year later of him taking this email, taking this meeting after an email that comes out and says, we want to meet with you because the Russian government is working to support your father's campaign. Now, whether that lady actually officially was, that's up to Robert Mueller to figure all of that information out.
Okay.
But when you start off saying something like, we did not actually collude, this is laughable, and then emails surface later that show that there was at least an intent to collude by actually trying to have a meeting, that's where the credibility gap is.
Okay, Hugo, how much of this at the time would be political inexperience? How much of this would be a father protecting his son? And how much of this is a real problem?
It's a real problem because it does allow critics of the administration, of which are legion, to keep their focus on this. And it's clearly, as you can see over the last 7 months, got in the way of the Republican legislative agenda and the president's legislative agenda. The collusion, or the alleged collusion, that whole investigation was actually crumbling for the first 6 months of this year. And the Don Jr. meeting gave it a new lease on life. It did show, as Atima was saying, at least a willingness on the part of Don Jr. to listen to someone who claimed to be acting on behalf of the Russian government. But I think that there's a lot to do with his sort of, inexperienced in politics. I don't know that there was going to be necessarily a willingness to go on from there and work, but it's still pretty thin gruel that the Democrats and the critics of the administration are serving up to suggest that there was collusion.
Right, and you keep hearing about Russia and North Korea and Venezuela. We got those questions in, and David Nelson, I got one question I heard on health care. And one question, or maybe it was a statement from Sarah Huckabee Sanders on tax reform saying, look, the president's had a month of tax reform listening sessions, one just yesterday with the real estate industry. The American people vote with their wallets, and they want a tax cut. Why don't we hear more of that in that press briefing?
I'm not sure. I mean, look, the media has an agenda to push, and there's a lot of reporters in that room, and they're kind of pushing that in another direction. They want to focus on Russia and some of the missteps in the White House. So I understand why the questions didn't get asked. The administration wants to pivot to tax reform. But,
well, they want to get something done.
They want to get something done, and I got real excited earlier when I saw Senator Thune talk about tax reform. We're going to go for all these things, almost a 1986 style.
Yeah.
And then McConnell dashed it all away, saying we're going to try to get something done between now and the end of the year because we can't get any help from the other side of the aisle.
Yeah, and Senator Thune, he said tax reform will create this economic growth that we've been waiting for. And then we saw Senator Barrasso, the Republican from Pennsylvania, he basically called it a resistance movement, the obstruction that we've seen from the Democrats? Connell McShane, I'm going to bring you in here. You know, Wall Street's listening to all of this, and yet stocks grinding higher. We're not at the highs of the session, but we're close. We're in record territory. Dow's up about 80 points. S&P's up. NASDAQ's up. What do you make of that?
Well, we're going to set another record here, I would think. I mean, that's the pace that we're on. You know, whether we get to that round number of 22,000, Lauren, you know, remains to be seen. But it looks like the 5th straight record close for the Dow. And then you start going back to when President Trump was elected, 48th record close since Election Day. That's the type of thing we're on pace for, and we'll get back to some of those since the election in a moment. But I got to tell you the truth here, we were talking about this earlier. If anything, this market is more kind of divorced from politics on a day-to-day basis than it has been in quite some time. We've really been hearing that for the last few months, and more of the focus is on things like corporate earnings. And Apple is all the talk today. What will Apple say after the closing bell? Not only about the quarter it's in right now, but how does it guide us for the future? With the anticipation of the iPhone 8 in the fall, the stock's been up a little bit ahead of that, so we're obviously looking at Apple, but you know, we'll see. It looks like another record close, and then you start to think about the corporate earnings, Lauren, after the close and see how they come in.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a decent, actually a good corporate earnings season, and revenue. You could kind of make the profit, you know, you could do those financial tweaks to make your profit look better, but if you're growing your revenue, that's a good thing. Mercedes, let's pivot here. The Democrats were called the obstruction party by Senator Barrasso just earlier. Do you think they're getting sick of being known as the no party, and how will that affect tax reform and getting that done? Because they sent this letter to the administration saying, these are our priorities. We will not support you unless this, this, and this happens, including no tax cut for the wealthy.
Well, that Senate Democrat letter did not have 3 of those Democrats who signed that letter. So those are the 3 Democrats to watch, one being, of course, Joe Manchin. So I think that the key for the Democrats is, look, they understand that this resistance movement, it's not going to be enough. I mean, you look at the polls and the American voters are saying, wait a second, that's all you're standing for? You got to stand for something. So they pushed through this better deal. It really doesn't have a lot of substance to it. It goes back to a very stale agenda. And so I think for the Democrats, they're going to have to come to the table and say, what can we get done to provide relief to the American people?
Manchin, Heitkamp of Indiana, Heitkamp of North Dakota, Donnelly of Indiana. Yes, all states won by Trump.